Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm really excited to be here.
I think we're both excited about this conversation because we hear it everywhere in the social media world. We hear it from the people we work with. And I wanted to bring you as an expert on the topic to demystify that weight gain around menopause. And I'm not even sure if that's the right word of saying it. Let's talk about, I don't even know why it happens is the right question or what it is. Let's start with that. Is it true that women are quote unquote doomed to gain weight at menopause?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. And I always like to start by validating the experience that regardless of whether you gain weight on a scale or otherwise, your body is changing. And so part of our conditioning or programming has been that our bodies shouldn't change. That once we reach adulthood, your wedding weight, your high school weight, whatever it is, that's like the pinnacle and that's where you should stay. And that if you're being good, you can maintain that until the day you die. And if you do something wrong, then it changes and it's your fault. So most women who exist in this world have grown up with it, either that as their personal narrative or the narrative of the people around them. So we get to midlife and things are changing, but it's not just happening to women. We see that if we look at men and women across the life cycle, decade over decade, from about 25, we see that bodies are starting to change. And so if we normalize that bodies change and we start as that as our foundation, we can then explore with more compassion why.
Mm.
If we start with the premise that it's not your fault, a human body is a changing body, you haven't done anything wrong, but it can be empowering to understand the process. So that's the first thing that I always like to talk about is your experience is real. You're not going crazy, but let's talk a little bit more about why it's happening and maybe give you a sense of control that will help you to make decisions that are going to feel more aligned with where you're actually trying to get to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And it aligns with how I approach mindset with social conditioning. We're conditioned that our body should not change. And that creates a perception on the changing body that it's wrong.
Exactly. Or that the only change that's acceptable is to get smaller,
Yes. And it's
right?
funny because I was reading a study on, they were trying to decipher thoughts versus perception. And when people have a certain perception on their weight, it makes them have a more distorted body image. And that's what you just explained here.
Yeah.
So
So,
body are supposed to change.
yeah, exactly. They are supposed to change. And if we just start as that's the foundation, bodies change. So, regardless of where you're at in the life cycle. So, if you're a teenager and you're going through puberty, your body could change a little, your body could change a lot, but it's going to change. When we see people in the seventh, eighth, ninth decades of life, their bodies are changing. Gravity's doing its thing. You can't change that without a lot of effort. I can't change the fact that I have more gray hairs and I have more laugh lines. That is a normal part of a human changing body. So, what we want to understand though is separating out the fact from the fiction, especially around the narrative of what's happening and what are the consequences of these changes in midlife. Because I think a lot of people, especially people who sell weight loss, have clued into that it's disempowering to tell somebody that their body is wrong or bad and they need to fix it. So they come in through the back door and say, "Oh, but it's your health we need to focus on. We're doing this for your health." So I like to back up a little bit and just to anybody who's listening who maybe isn't 100% sure what's happening or what stage they're in. For people who are in perimenopause, you're on a hormonal roller coaster. So if you're still having periods, but maybe they're not as regular as they used to be, you might be having other symptoms like mood swings, hot flashes, those kinds of things, but you're still having a period. You haven't gone 12 months without one. You're swimming in very unpredictable hormone soup. And as a result of that, where your body distributes its stores, meaning your fat stores, is going to change. So that's the first thing that happens is that we go from like a pear shape or what used to be called like a gynoid shape to more of an apple shape. And so that is a result of programming in your DNA. You can't cut carbs and expect to change. That is going to happen to most people going through this transition. So even if the scale isn't changing, in the mirror and how your clothes fit will change as you transition through this. Again, normal part of a changing body.
And that is due to hormonal change, which is the entire period of perimenopause and adjustment in hormones to the next phase of your life.
Exactly. So that's a change that happens to almost everyone. And obviously, there are degrees of this. So when I look at the women in my family, this happens quite a bit so that by the time that they're in their 70s and 80s, they have like stick legs kind of thing. We joke that it's like an apple on a pair of toothpicks, right? And other families, though, may not notice this as much, just depending again on your unique makeup. So we have this redistribution of assets, is what I call it, that's happening. As we get closer to actual menopause, and so we're getting closer to this cessation of periods, you're now in a period of low estrogen, low progesterone, lower testosterone. We do start to see some muscle changes. We know that from the age of about 30, it's harder for people to build and maintain muscle. Estimates are anywhere from a 3 to 5% loss in muscle mass per decade. And that might increase over time. It might speed up. The rate of that muscle loss is probably speeding up the closer you get to menopause. When you lose muscle, there is a change in your metabolic rate. Your metabolic rate may change as a result of this, but it still doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It just means your body is changing according to its predicted path. This is where the weight neutral mindset is really helpful because you do want to focus on muscle, but you don't want to make the focus of your efforts weight loss.
If I hear you right, because I'm in the thick of that as well. I'm like 8 months without the period. So I'm like advanced in the perimenopause, about to hit menopause. And what I heard you say is that muscle mass reduction, loss
Yep.
in muscle mass happens at menopause and forward. Is that what I heard?
It accelerates a little bit. So
Got it.
it's happening from age 30, but there's an acceleration around menopause. That seems to be what we're seeing in the research.
So
And
therefore, the caloric intake we take in, instead of creating muscle, then creates fats. And that's partly why we see an increase in
yeah, that
that
could
percentage.
So it's really complicated because we also have what could be happening with weight cycling. So a lot of
Yes.
people also get to midlife and menopause with a long sorted history with diets. Whenever we pursue intentional weight loss, when there is weight loss, there is almost always regain, and that regain is more likely to be fat than muscle.
Mhm.
So it would not be unusual for the people that I work with, and I was one of these people too, to have had 10, 20 cycles of weight loss and regain. And so we get to this, and it's just messy. It's just this messy middle of your hormones are changing. This is having an impact on your metabolism, for lack of a better word, your makeup, how much lean muscle your body has. We also have things like sleep deprivation that can increase appetite and increase interest in eating foods that are going to give you quick energy. It's very difficult to pay attention to your hunger and fullness cues when you're tired, when you're having a hot flash every 3 minutes, when you're experiencing mood changes. So we have all of these other things that are like crash landing, making it very difficult to be an intuitive eater, but even just to have any degree of like mindfulness, right? So even if you know all these things, being able to translate into a practice that doesn't feel like a diet and isn't a diet can be really hard, which is where the self-compassion has to be part of the conversation,
And
right?
where, when people talk about research around this topic, there is no way to control for all of that in research. And the first place where you started, when you say, like, when we arrive at midlife, it's the place and time where many women say, F this shit, at the
Yep.
same time as perimenopause, at the same time as metabolic change. Like, all of this is happening at the same time. So what is it that cause body changes? We can't pinpoint just one thing.
No. And there's also just a change in lifestyle. I'm about to be 48. I'm 3 years post-menopause. So I went into menopause a little earlier than average. I have 3 teenagers. If we scroll back the clock 10 years ago, I was running after 3 kids under the age of 7. Now I have teenagers who hide in their room and I have to pry them out with bribes and food. And it's just a different stage of life. I'm not up at 6 o'clock in the morning and out the door by 8 anymore. So there are changes. And what I love about intuitive eating and what I love about the practice of tuning in and not outsourcing your nutrition and your knowledge about your health is that if I'm paying attention to that, I'm noticing those changes. I'm
Mhm.
noticing that I was one of those people that I would, as soon as my feet would hit the floor, I was thinking about breakfast. Like I woke up hungry and breakfast was the meal that I was most interested in because that was when I was hungriest. That's not the case anymore. So I've adjusted. I still eat breakfast. I still eat a satisfying, filling breakfast, but it's not what it was 10 years ago.
Mm.
So when we can insource that process of, okay, what am I feeling? How do I feel when this happens? What do I want? But also, how can I just practice it from a place of self discovery and interest and like just wanting to take care of myself and not control what my body looks like?
What I like in what you said is the mindfulness or the self trust, the mindfulness we acquire with the practice of intuitive eating has a ripple effect beyond the food
Yeah.
in many other parts of your life. And you end up living a more pleasant life through the practice of being present to your food.
Yeah, absolutely. Food needs to fit into your life. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to learn how you can incorporate changes with food as you go through different ages and stages. But if the only thing we know is how do I control my food to control what my body looks like, we have no framework to respond with self compassion.
So let's talk about the changes, the alteration that we can apply to our nutrition, understanding what we just talked about, right? Metabolic
Yeah.
changes, muscle mass. We can also talk about bone density, all these things. What is your
Well, I think
perspective there?
yeah, the most important thing is that a human body, you're still human. Not everything changes. Like so much of the narrative around menopause nutrition is, oh my gosh, it's like the best hook ever. It's, oh my gosh, everything changes. If you don't do something about it now, you're going to regret it in 5 years. And it's all fear based. You're still a human body. That's the default. So you're a human body. You still need to eat regularly. You will feel better, sleep better, have more energy if you build plates that include all the food groups. You can call that a balanced plate. You can call it whatever you want, but just not avoiding things and not putting other things on a pedestal. Those are some of the basics, but I like to think of them as like key ingredients that are like a marker. So you're on this trip and you've laid out your map of where you want to go and you've decided that these pit stops along the way. And so thinking about plant forward patterns of eating, not plant based, not you don't have to be vegan, you don't have to cut things out, but just recognizing that there is a lot of research that more plant based protein, more fiber, that these are ingredients that can support feeling better in your body, which usually translates to feeling better about your body, even if your body doesn't change. So thinking about things like soy foods, for example, I'm a big fan of them because they can help your hot flashes, but they're also a plant-based protein. They have lots of fiber. They're really versatile. But all plants contain fiber. So even just making a goal of I'm going to put more plants on my plate. I'm not going to make it a rule. I'm not going to count, measure, and track. I'm not going to put kale on a pedestal and iceberg lettuce at the bottom of the pack. I'm just going to say more plants. And if we think about building those balanced plates and thinking about, okay, what's going to help me to have energy to go for a walk, or what's going to help me to improve my mood and manage my mood swings, that's probably going to involve things like protein at most meals. Again, you don't have to count, measure, or track. You just look at your plate and do I have what I call a main character energy protein? A sprinkling of seeds helps, but maybe that would be even better if I had that with some hummus or if I had that with a piece of chicken or if I had that with some cheese. So, trying to think about what are my long-term goals, but also how am I feeling today and how do I want to nourish this experience that I'm having with my meal today?
So the narrative that many women will hear on doubling down on protein and 80 grams and 90 grams, 100 grams of protein, there's actually no facts behind that.
It kind of
Helping us prevent muscle mass or bone reduction.
So, protein is a more challenging question to answer like simply. So, as adults get older, and men and women, our body doesn't use protein as efficiently. So, as we get older, we do sometimes need a little bit more to have the same effect as when we were younger. Shining a spotlight on protein as we get older, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you get into these all or nothing, everyone needs to be eating this much all the time or else. Because that's the take home message that women are hearing
Yes.
is, oh my gosh, if I'm not getting 150 grams of protein, I'm like going to die tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm going to
So,
lose all my muscle mass overnight.
yeah. So, what I bring it back to is having main character energy at most of your meals most of the time will cover most of your bases. If you
Mhm.
are an athlete, if you have performance goals or you have specific sport related things that you're working on, work with a sports dietitian. Have somebody help you figure that out. But don't lose sleep if you haven't had 150 grams of protein every day. Because that's not normal eating. Even when we're talking about the benefits of extra protein as we get older, it still needs to fall under the umbrella of what's normal, right?
So
Okay.
when we talk about protein, it's very similar to the first portion of this interview where it is normal that the human body change and evolve with age. Meaning, what I heard you say is it's normal that we are not as efficient extracting protein from food. So, yeah, there may be a need to increase slightly, but not in the wellness culture way where everything in your life has to be around protein. Is
Yeah,
that the
exactly.
takeaway message?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about how can I support my health and how can I support aging, I'm saying that in quotations because I hate the word, but I don't know how else to say it. But I
Better
describe
than
it as,
anti-aging.
yeah, I'm pro aging, but I want to do it with independence and confidence and mobility and as much health as is within my control. But I'm not going to try and stop it because it's happening because I'm human. I describe it as I want to be able to carry my groceries up the stairs when I'm 80, and I want to be able to live my best life when I retire. And what I can do around that is building these balance plates, moving my body regularly, including some strength training, but also just including movement of all kinds. And I have protein powder that I include a few times when I want to, but I'm not counting, measuring, tracking. I'm not using it every day. I'm not snacking on chicken breasts. I'm building balanced, satisfying plates that meet all my needs.
And I want people to know the behind the scene also. We've been on chat and DM recently about making it easier about plant fiber, right?
Yeah.
We had this conversation about fridge salad. And I want
Yeah. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
to hear that conversation because I'm like, I want to be more focused on eating more fiber from a plant sources. So we were chatting about the concept of fridge salad. How can I make having a balanced plate, moving my body easier with more ease? And those fridge salad are changing my life because I can leave this damn salad in my fridge for 5 days and it tastes as good on day 5 as it did on
Yes.
day 1. Therefore, it's easier for me to plow like salad on my plate.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I love recommending too is that a chickpea salad, a black bean salad, a lentil salad that includes maybe rice, maybe pasta, maybe potatoes, any other vegetables you like. You just throw it all in a bowl and it can either be it can be the meal, it can be a snack, it can be part of a meal. Like you just have so much flexibility when you're putting a lot of things in one bowl, right?
And it's easier for you to eat that balanced plate, but it's also easier for you to have pleasure with food because you prep the food that you enjoy having, not the one that you should be having, like snacking on a chicken breast. You prepare the salad that is pleasurable for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I want to recap. When we're going through the period of transition around perimenopause, menopause, the body's expected to change. Nothing has gone wrong. Nothing's broken. We don't need to fix it. But it is normal that the fat distribution on the body changes and evolve with time. And it is research or evidence-based that we start to lose muscle mass.
Yep.
But eating twice the amount of protein is not the solution. But
Nope.
integrating strength training is something that could help you prevent more reduction in muscle mass and slightly higher intake of protein. Is that it?
And there have also been studies that have looked at what matters most, protein intake or strength training.
Yes.
And hands down, it's strength training.
Really?
So even people who have not increased their protein intake, but have increased resistance training and strength training, built muscle. So it is so important that we're helping people to focus on what actually matters and not the diet and wellness culture narrative about what matters.
And to me, I'm going to integrate my specialty, which is behavioral changes. If strength training is what matters the most in aging well, then the way we think about health promoting behavior in order for us to train more, not excessively, just train more, is critically important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Therefore, self-acceptance, like the beginning of the conversation, is key over anything else. Like accepting that my body is changing and it is normal, I know for a fact will induce more health promoting behavior than trying to fight it and resist it.
Yeah, exactly. And if we think about when people want to lose weight or are told that they should lose weight to support their health,
Yeah.
I think it is very important that we talk about what are the potential consequences of pursuing aggressive weight loss. The consequences of that at any age are that you are going to lose muscle,
Mm.
guaranteed, along with fat. And so what I tell people is that in postmenopause, I will take fat gain over muscle loss any day and every day. That doesn't mean that I'm not focusing on building my muscle, but the risk of pursuing intentional and aggressive weight loss, which is very much part of the conversation that's happening in the world now, I think the risks of that are much greater than going into my fifth, sixth, and seventh decade with a higher BMI.
Hmm. And I'm just reading a book right now, and I won't name it because it's very fat phobic, about perimenopause, and the doctor sharing her experience of her mom being on a diet up to the age of 75. And she lost her independence because of bone fracture and muscle mass as she was aging 65 plus, to the point where she had to go in a residential facility because she was still pursuing weight loss and had lost so much muscle mass and wasn't protecting her bone density because she was still focused on trying to shrink her body.
And there are numerous studies, including studies of studies, meta-analyses looking at populations over time that have found that weight gain in the 50s, 60s, and 70s protects against bone loss.
Do you know
So,
why?
yeah, because anytime that we put increased pressure on the bones, it's the same as strength training or resistance training. We put pressure on the bones and we get bone growth. So,
Interesting, fascinating.
so when we look at, and this isn't like a what is the purpose, but again, when we're looking at bodies change and there are likely some benefits to that change that have lived through all these evolutionary changes because they have helped us to live longer.
And it's the same phenomenon if we take the conversation and look at no matter what the age, and we say to people, you have to lose weight to be stronger. My analogy is always, let's look at some type of athlete. Let's think about a football player, for an example, American football. Like those guys are huge, like they're big people. and they're able to move, and they're athletes no matter what their weight is, meaning the body is able to adapt to the weight by growing bones and straightening the muscle no matter what the size of the body is.
And if I can share one study that I just finished reading, I shared about it on my stories recently, is a study that was published looking at cardiovascular fitness, which is a measurable metric. And it was a meta analysis of, I want to say 16 or 17 studies, almost 400,000 participants in total. And all these studies use BMI, which is problematic for so many reasons. But what they found was that people who were in larger bodies, including those who were classified in the obese range of BMI, if they were fit, had a 2 to 3 times reduced likelihood of dying from a cardiovascular event compared to people who had a normal BMI but were unfit. And this study included about 30% women. So we're talking about a well-represented like demographic. And because this cardiovascular fitness is something, again, that can be measured, this is a pretty high quality observational study that really reinforces that like fitness is not a number, it's not a size. And we need to stop telling people that losing weight will make you healthy. Improving your fitness will improve your health, regardless of what your size is. And fitness is something that is not dependent on what you weigh.
I'll continue on that. Losing weight won't make you cardiovascular more fit. You're
Yeah.
gonna have to train the muscles, the heart muscle and the lung muscle, in order to respond to the stimuli, no matter what the weight is.
Yeah. So this is when we talk about weight neutral goals, right? And the best way to say it is I don't care what happens to someone's weight.
Mhm.
That is the least of my concerns because I don't know what's going to happen to someone's weight when we start moving more regularly, when we start eating balanced meals, when we start prioritizing sleep and stress reduction and all these things. Weight isn't a behavior, but the behavior of choosing to move your body more often in ways that you enjoy, the behavior of learning to cook food if you don't love to cook, or to buy food that you like that is also health promoting, whatever it is, those are behaviors. And so why not focus on those because we do have more control over those versus the number that we see on the scale.
And why do you think, in your clinical observation of working with women for a number of years, why do you think it's so challenging for your population to focus on the behavior? And what's your solution to that?
Part of it is just the culture,
Yeah.
right? In that we have only talked about health and weight and food and nutrition in terms of calories and grams and counting and measuring and tracking. And we have not taught people the process of change, which I know that you focus on behavior change. And I'm sure you say the same thing as I say, is that the outcome is not what we set our sights on. We set our sights on the process and we make sure that it's aligned with our values so that we enjoy the process and that we want to do it regardless of whether we get to the actual outcome that we thought we were heading towards. That's how you change things. And that is not taught in health education.
Mm.
That is not taught. That I was never taught that as a dietitian. I was never taught that as a naturopathic doctor. And even when we think about how weight and nutrition is prescribed, it's do this, follow this plan, and this should happen. And when it doesn't, we don't blame the plan, we blame the person. And so we disempower people by giving them one size fits all information and then tell them that they're the problem.
Mm.
So it's a lot of this undieting, this uncoupling beliefs of what does it mean to actually be healthy? Is my goal actually my goal, or have I been using that as a proxy for something else?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
learning how to create new behavior and doing it from a place of power, from a place of love instead of fear.
Yeah, exactly. And it has to be with acceptance too. This acceptance that bodies are changing and that even with the best of intentions, the best resources, the best support, and maybe the best execution, there are still going to be things that change that you couldn't have prevented and that you can't fix with food.
And it doesn't mean that because it's changing, it's a bad thing. Perhaps it's
Yeah.
opening you up to a new phase of life, a new way of living life. And that's why your body's changing to prepare you for that. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer, but I do think that I love doing values realignments because the values that I had at 25 don't look anything like the values I have in my 40s. But yet we often are operating based on what those values were that we grew up with, family of origin, that were as we entered adulthood, those kind of formative years. So being able to say, actually, what is important to me? If peace is important to me, if being present is important to me, if adventure and curiosity and compassion are important to me, is following a diet in line with my values anymore? And most of the time when we can look at that and say, actually, I don't think that I want, like trying to hate myself into a body that I love, that's not aligned with my values anymore. I have enough life experience and wisdom to know that's not going to work. I think that it really gives people an opportunity to redesign what they want the next season of life to look like with curiosity and adventure.
Before we end the interview, I want to make sure that is there any other element of perimenopause and menopause that I haven't asked question about that you would like to bring forward in this conversation?
So the one question is, what about hormones? Will hormones fix it? Will they help? Will they reverse it?
Hormone
And
replacement therapy
yeah,
or
hormone replacement, we don't want
menopausal
hormone
hormone?
therapy. And what we know is that menopause hormone therapy does not have a significant impact on body composition. There is some research that says that it may slow down the accelerated muscle loss or body changes, but at least currently in early 2025, we do not have a good body of research to say that this would be an effective treatment, quote unquote, for these changes that are happening. Hormone therapy, however, can improve sleep, it can help with mood, it can be a game changer for a lot of the attunement disruptors that might make it hard for you to care for yourself in the way that you want to. So if you're trying to move more often, if you're trying to spark an interest in cooking again, but you're not sleeping and you hate your life, it's going to be hard to do. So hormone therapy is amazing for lots of reasons for lots of people, but no one should start it or expect it to reverse these body changes that are programmed into our DNA.
I'm curious because I don't follow a lot of perimenopause and menopause accounts. Is that what's being sold right now? Hormonal therapy could do this?
Sometimes, yeah. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's, oh, you can reverse the meno belly, that dreaded term, right? Or for another really good one that we haven't talked about is insulin resistance, that menopause causes insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is the cause of all of your body changes and problems. And if you just fix that, vice versa, et cetera. So what we know is that insulin resistance, again, increases around the time of menopause. We don't know if it's correlation or causation, because not everybody who is postmenopausal develops insulin resistance, but there are more people who are postmenopausal who have it versus those who aren't. Again, correlation, causation, we don't know, but we don't treat it any differently. But cutting carbs is not going to fix it, regardless of your age. And it's not required because insulin resistance has a genetic component, it has a lifestyle component, it has a diet component, but hormones aren't going to fix that either. So definitely keep that in mind too.
I'll share a personal event in my life. Recently, I went for my annual blood test checkup that we do in Canada, and my cholesterol marker had changed. So, backstory here, and I'd love to hear that your input on that. When my perimenopause symptoms started about 3 years ago, I was put on a low dosage estrogen progesterone birth control pill. And recently, I had to come off of that pill due to something else in my life. And now my cholesterol marker have changed. My triglyceride have went down, and then my LDL went up. And when I was talking with my physician, she said, "Oh, that's totally normal because we know that birth control pill increased triglyceride and reduced LDL. So these changes are normal because you've eliminated birth control pill." I'm like, fascinating. If I had listened to general health advice because I'm in a larger body, I would have thought that the triglyceride level that were high were due to my weight and my lifestyle choices. But in fact, it was due to hormones that I was
Yeah,
taking.
and estrogen definitely definitely has an impact on cholesterol metabolism.
Yeah.
And we do see that cholesterol levels jump 10 to 20% around menopause. And so a lot of people are taken by surprise that their
Yeah.
LDL will jump for no good reason. And it's very disconcerting. But yeah, that's another change that happens that is expected. Doesn't mean we don't address it, but it also means that we don't blame ourselves for it.
So how would you address it if it's just part of the hormonal roller coaster you're on?
So we can still think about increasing fiber, right? So fiber is
Yeah,
a
just the
great way.
basic.
Yeah, it's the basics, right? We don't have
Yes.
to like invoke magic. We just have to focus on the basics.
Yeah, and if we weren't obsessed with weight equals cholesterol equals dying of a heart attack, if we aren't obsessed with that trend line, we can just say, oh, it's just part of the changes and let's retest it next year and see what happened instead of thinking it's the end of the world and I'm going to have a heart attack tomorrow morning.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much for your wisdom.
Thanks for the conversation. I love talking about it because it is such a scary time if you don't have people in your corner who can help to demystify it and really just take the level of fear out of the conversation. Because, yeah, there's a lot to look forward to in menopause. I always say I wouldn't go back for anything. It's like the best season of life for me.
And I want to say, take out the fear, take out diet culture and wellness culture out of it, and have an actual factual conversation around menopause and perimenopause.
Exactly.
And that's what you do. How can
Okay.
people work with you, Jen?
There's lots of different ways to work with me, but the best place to find me is on Instagram, and my community, the Midlife Feast community, incorporates some one-on-one, some group learning, but also some self-directed learning so that people can get the information that they need at their own pace in their own home that is completely free of diet and wellness culture.
Thank you very much, Jen. If you are listening to the podcast, you're probably in need of support. You have to come and grab our free non-diet coaching assessment tool and the how to use audio training at stephaniedolce.com/client assessment. And if you want support with the concept taught on the podcast and take your skills to the next level, we have a number of resources and programs on the shop page of our website. The best bet is for you to join our newsletter to get all the deeds as they become available. And I'll see you on the other side.